process depends a lot on how we interpret and remember the information. The brain actually takes up both the information from the environment. It takes the visual inputs as well as the verbal inputs and tries to make a connection between them. After a long time, you may be meeting a person. Okay, and what happens is that you remember the face, but you don't remember the name of the person. Why? Because the visual image of the face is stored in a different place and the verbal element of the face is stored in a different place. Am I able to think about something without having a visual imagery or mental imagery in my mind? Generally, it is not possible. The word coding is generally misunderstood by many people, right? So many people think that it is related to artificial intelligence. It is related to the coding system that children learn in different computers and make use of them. It is not in that way. Coding basically means something which is encrypted in some form or the other. So that is what this coding means. So let us go to the next slide, please. Hello. Yeah. So learning process depends a lot on how we interpret and remember the information. Okay. So when I'm telling information, it is basically the outside world, whatever is available in the outside world. It is the things that are coming to our mind through our different senses, right? So this senses basically are visual in nature, and sometimes this visual things are converted into some form of language. So language is something that helps us to comprehend things, which brings the image immediately to our mind. Okay. So what Fabio or others are saying is that we should give equal importance to the verbal element, that is the language element, as well as the visual element. The brain actually takes up both the information from the environment. It takes the visual inputs as well as the verbal inputs and tries to make a connection between them. Okay, so we have to think in terms of how to make this connection strong between these two different systems. So mental representation helps us to become more and more aware about the outside world. Most of you must be familiar with the different learning theories. As you are all teachers, you must be knowing about behaviorism, cognitivism, constructivism, humanism. So these are some of the approaches which people take when they talk in terms of learning theories. And you must also be remembering that behaviorism was the initial part of understanding about the human behavior and human learning. Later on, people started talking in terms of cognitivism. So this theory basically falls under the second part, that is the cognitive theory approaches, or which we call as information processing theories. Okay, so now see, when we are trying to try to think of things, you might be I can just suggest an incident. After a long time, you may be meeting a person. Okay, and what happens is that you remember the face, but you don't remember the name of the person. Why? Because the visual image of the face is stored in a different place and the verbal element of the face is stored in a different place. That's why you remember the face, but you are not able to connect the name of the person when you're seeing them after a long time. So it says that both the channels work separately. Both the channels, that is the verbal elements as well as the visual elements, are working two different channels simultaneously. Unless we consciously make the connections between them, this information will not be stored for long period of time. That is the idea behind talking about this dual coding. Okay, so we'll go to the next slide. Okay, so dual coding theory was formulated by Alan Fabio. His theory came out, he gave a theory, imageries and this one different in different form he had given this thing, but it first paper came out in 1986. So later on, you'll find most of the books are available in Google Scholar or Google Books also. You can refer there also. Though it is a very old or it is a quite common theory, it is not much discussed in the educational institutions along with the teachers and all. So when I was just going through some of the books, I found this quite interesting because I take a course called as Visual Design in Education. So when I was going through some of the literature related to that, I came across this, and so I started reading it again, and I was fascinated by the way that he was able to present the ideas here. So dual coding is also a kind of learning theory like operant conditioning and information processing theory. Dual means two. So the hypothesis suggests that any information which has been encoded verbally as well as in the form of images is recalled with data. So this is just one theory. Along with this, there are things which also other things also which help us to remember the things in the long-term memory. It is, for example, if some information is very interesting or you like something very much, those kind of information also will be stored at a very long time for a very long time in the long-term memory. That which you can connect with your previous experience, that is also remembered more by the memory. Otherwise, it is very difficult for the mind to store all the information in the mind. So in this way, we can find that verbal and visual imageries are connected in a much better fashion because it helps us in our long-term memory. Okay. So let us go to the next one. So in this theory, what he says is this visual and this verbal stimulus, they function at three levels. So they form certain connections between them that I will be putting up in a kind of illustration in the next slide. But first we have to remember what are the three different types of processing. One is the representation information processing, which is the activation of the verbal or non-verbal representation. This is the first one. So when I use the word cat, so all of us can visualize cat either as a photo or as a drawing or as a cartoon. So any way or the other, you are able to represent the idea of a cat in one way or the other, right? So representation in the information as an activation of verbal and non-verbal representation. Referential information processing remains activation of verbal system by the non-verbal system and vice versa. So what does the second one suggest? That immediately the moment I occur or utter a word, I am able to visualize the thing in my mind. For example, if I say flower, many of you can visualize it immediately. But I use the word ka or I use the word poo. So those who know the language can relate it with the image. The other two words that I told, ka and poo, are also a verbal system in some other language. But we have not understood that language because that verbal thing we have not made connection with the same flower, right? So this is referential information. I say flower, I imagine a flower. I see a flower, my mind recalls it as flower, as a word, right? So there is interconnection or vice versa, things are happening in the mind. Next is associative information processing. This is the activation of representation within the verbal or non-verbal system. So if I take the verbal system, when I use the word cat, what are the other things that you associate with a cat also comes into your memory. Okay, so you will remember cats and cat's paw, cat's tail, or dogs, because certain things are common when you talk about cats. So you fish, or like something like a mouse. So all these are associated with that verbal word. This is called as associative information processing. The other one is with the non-verbal also, or the visual also, it happens that when I imagine a cat, I imagine the full cat. I cannot imagine a cat in parts. Okay, this is the ear, this is the leg. I imagine that as a whole cat, that there are parts to this word that I'm telling as cat. So this is called as associative information processing. Okay. So main thing is that, let us look at the next slide. So next slide is what I had been telling you people. When an image is seen, people tend to associate with a verbal element of the stimulus, the languages known to them. Similarly, the word will help to stimulate the retrieval of image and its associated attributes. So this is just a normal kind of picture I had drawn here. So you'll find that whenever somebody sees this, they will remember in the languages that is known to them. That language which they don't know, they will not associate that word with this object that has been drawn here. So this is what we call as associative information processing. Okay. So this is I am trying to explain it the way that mind works when it sees an object. So let us go to the next slide. So next slide represents a kind of what we can say visual imagery of the that I have been talking. Okay. So as a whole, it may look confusing, but when we look at some of the parts individually, we will be able to recollect, or we can able to understand this thing more. So what I have done is I have put two things on the top. That is, one is the verbal stimulus, other is the non-verbal stimulus. Verbal stimulus means that which is related to the verbal system, whether it is English, Tamil, Telugu, Gujarati, all these are verbal stimulus. The other one is non-verbal stimulus. These are the things which are either visual in nature, or in some cases in another type, something is there, it is symbolic in nature. So those all will fall under the non-verbal stimulus. Most of them come through our sensory system. Both of them come through our sensory system means all our senses, eyes, ears, nose, all this system are helping us to understand the verbal stimulus and the non-verbal stimulus. You cannot say that only the ears and the eyes are helping us to understand the outside world. Even the sense of smell or the sense of taste helps us to know something more about the world. That's why we say it as sensory system. So we use this representative connections. So when I'm using this representative connections, it means that the moment I utter a word biryani, it also brings the images of the rice dish, but also it brings the flavor of that food dish also. So we cannot isolate the things which are existing in the world, because all have been imprinted in the mind. So that is why we called it as representational connections. Now what happens? There are two things which are presented here. One is called as logogens. The other one is called as imagens. So what are logogens? Logogens are the verbal or the language stimulus which is coming. That is called as logogens. So that is why I have put it in yellow color. The other one is imagens. Imagens is the imagery or the visual images which are created in the mind. So there are two things. Now, you will find in logogens, there are even some blanks over there. So if I use certain word in that blank, so correspondingly, I will be getting one imagens in the other side also. Correspondingly, for the next blank space also, I will be getting another image in my mind. Let us take the same example. Suppose if it is flower. So if it's a logogen. So when I'm using the word flower, what else comes to the mind? Leaves, branches, roots, smell, all these are connected because these words that I'm telling, S-M-E-L-L, smell, flower, F-L-O-W-E-R, or leaf, L-E-A-F, all these are verbal words. So these are all associated with each other, either hierarchically or in a branched manner, they are all associated with each other. So that also comes to our mind. That's why we call it as associative connections between the objects which are verbal in nature. Right? Now, let us come to the imagens. Imagens, it actually works with the sense of hierarchy, or not only hierarchy, it is kind of whole and the parts. As I told you, some things are visualized as a whole, and then we look at what are the details inside it, because that visual image is something which incorporates the parts inside itself. As I told you, you remember the whole thing. You don't remember the parts of certain animals or parts of the tree or something like that. You remember them as a whole. So that way also they are called as associative connections. So that's why even when we see a leaf, we know that it is part of this bigger tree. This is a tulsi leaf or this is an ashoka tree. So how do we do that? Because we look at the thing as part of the whole tree. That's why we are able to make the association between that leaf and that tree. So this way we find that uh, the connections which are made are referential connections. Each one of them are related with each other. So accordingly, what happens is we are able to respond to the answers which are given to us. Say in lower classes, what happens? The teacher gives a picture of a drawing and asks the child to identify the verbal in a language they have to write what that object means. So generally what children do is what they are familiar with, they will say. They will not use the common name for that object that they are seeing. So you might have seen that there is a picture of a burger with buns and that patties in between. And the child says this is McDonald's. So it is because the right word or the right connotation the child doesn't understand. It understands what is in its experience. So he will say this is a burger. It is not burger, it is McDonald's. So somewhere or the other, the associative functions are working in the mind. That is also not wrong. But as teachers, we expect that student to answer as burger, not as McDonald's, right? So many of us also might have experienced these things. So how does this cognitive system work is that this representational units of images are called as imagines, and the repression units of the verbal are called as logogens. Logogens are having associative entities in hierarchies, whereas the imagines have whole and the part as the kind of what you can say representation of the non-verbal stimulus which is there. Okay, and how can this be of interest to teachers? So let us go to the next slide. So there is a research support for this kind of connections that have been talked about by Fabio. That there is a person called as John Sweller who says that this working memory capacity can be effectively increased and learning be improved by using the dual mode presentation. So this is an experiment that he has done, and he has been to come out with the findings that the capacity of the working memory or the what we call as short-term memory can be improved by using this dual mode of presentation. Another research support is there, which is presented by Jill and Herbert, that the diagrams are efficient than text. So in this experiment, what they did, they divided the presentation into two parts. For one set of sample, what they gave was just the text. So in that text, they had this person, John and Mary. Their children are 3. One is a girl, one is a boy, one is like this. So like that, they gave this in a textual matter or in the verbal form. The other presenters or the other sample people were given visual presentation of the same idea. So when they drew the visual presentation, what they did, they drew the human figure of man and women and named them as John and Mary. They made arrows with from that images to the next row as a boy, a girl, and girl's name, boy's name. It was presented visually. So the persons who read it in the verbal format or in the language format were able to recall the things very less after some time. But the ones who went through the pictures of the man's figure, women's figure, and the children's figure, they were able to recall much of the information. And they were able to tell the relationship also very nicely that so and so is the son of John, so and so is the daughter of John. So that relationship also they were able to remember and tell after a long time also. So this suggested that visual images help person to recollect and verbally respond to certain questions based on the items which are given here. Similarly, other researches have also been done. So there also people were asking whether color graphics will be more pleasing or more remembered than the black and white graphics. no, at that time they were able to find out the achievement through both the images, means whether it is black and white or color was the same. Only thing, it should be a visual presentation. Then the participants were able to remember those things very nicely. So this is what this third research is saying. And only thing that they say is that when you are using color element, you should see whether it is essential or related to the content that you are teaching. If it is essential and related to the content, then the achievement is more. Otherwise, there is no difference between a black and white figure and a colorful figure. So this is what the research is telling about this dual coding, means that is visual and the verbal connections. Okay. So let us go to the next one, next slide. So what we are able to gather from this is that we know that during exams that students are asked to write the information in an organized manner. And when teaching, the teacher is using all lecture method in teaching those things. So the idea is that when you are verbally communicating something, orally communicating something, the images which are stuck in the mind of the children may be different. That's why when you are asking them to write something, they are not able to make the connections between the words and the words they listen to, and what these words actually represented. What does that imagery of that word, they are not able to understand. That's why there is not much success among the students here. So what suggestion we can gain through this activity or this theory is that we must take care when we are teaching the students whether they have understood the connection between the word and the image or the particular thing that what the teacher wanted the students to understand. So this has to be taken care of by the teachers. So in this way, we can make use of this dual coding when we are teaching in our classrooms. Okay. So this is where when we can say that whatever the student is learning, he will be able to recall and able to what we can say, like producing that images or producing those words will be easy for them if they are taught in such manner. So, okay, this is the way that I am able to talk about Pavio's theory on dual coding.
We have one question from M. Tirumurugan. Since we remember visuals more than words, shouldn't our teaching be more image based rather than memorizing words and sentences?
Correct. So what you are saying is true, but you must also remember there is a capacity for the what you can say processing of the visual images by the children or anybody for that matter. So we might also have experienced that when we are looking at social media, we are coming across so many images in the Facebook or in other social media that we tend to forget which image is connected where. So it is not more and more visual which is more important. It is basically the visual and the verbal connections is more important. Are you able to connect the visual with some amount of language descriptions? Then it becomes useful for you. Otherwise, just visual is not going to help us much. It will tire our eyes. That's what I feel, that too much of visuals will actually tire our eyes. We just get like anything should be in moderation. It should not be too much or it should not be very less. This is one thing we can remember. The other one is that see, like as human beings, we have this unique capacity of simultaneously processing both the verbal and non-verbal information in our mind. It is not available to other creatures. It is something which is specially for human beings. We are able to process the information synchronously. Matlab, together we are able to process both the information at the same time. So that is a plus point for us. And when we talk in terms of thinking, what I feel is that thinking cannot exist or somewhere or the other that either you remember the things which are there in the book or you some abstract things also in some way or the other, that abstract things are also uh, having a mental representation in the mind. Suppose I talk in terms of sound. Sound is something which actually only when it is produced, you are able to hear it. But as a sound, it is an abstract concept. But you are able to relate it either with a word or with something which is you heard somewhere, you are able to connect with it. That's why we can say that, this dual coding is useful only when we are using visuals and verbal. It is usual. It can be used for thinking processes also. Many of us try to remember things when we make mind maps. So most of you might have heard about mind maps, where teachers or students make a diagrammatic representation of the ideas which are available in a particular chapter or in a particular book. They try to make a mental map of it. So it is easy for the person to recall the information. They give small brief imagery of where are you, you are here. So these are some of the things which will help us to think also. It is not just something which is meant for only for children. It can be used by elders also.
Thank you, ma'am, for that. We have another question, one more question from Tirumurugan. Dual coding may help in memory. Does it help in thinking?
So I don't actually differentiate between thinking and memory. So memory is a part of the thinking process. If I ask you to think about something, you will ask me, what should I think about? Is it possible to think about something without my uttering any word? The moment I utter a word, you are able to associate with that word either something which is known to you or it is not known to you. Suppose I use the word Gilbert's structure of intellect. So this is a word that you are not come across before, you are not able to associate with it, right? So unless I ask you something, this is what I want you to think about, then you will think, right? If I use the word northern plains, unless you know that mind comes or thinks about what is the plains, northern plains of India looks like, it is very difficult to think about it, right? So anything for that matter, uh, you can also means like test yourself. Am I able to think about something without having a visual imagery or mental imagery in my mind? Generally, it is not possible. Even if I'm talking about coding or people make programming, they have certain things in their mind. Even that they cannot function without the exact symbols, what those represent. They cannot write codes also, right?
Thank you, ma'am, for that. We have another question from Preeti. How does dual coding work with those who have visual or hearing impairment?
Correct. So this is a kind of what we can say, like one lacuna in this dual coding, because again, there may be people who are deaf also, there may be people who are blind also, there may be people who are not able to speak also, but each of them have their own language also. Blind people have their more, that code which is their braille code is there, which they use with their fingertips and try to understand that language aspect of that um, braille system. They use the braille system in order to understand about the world. Similarly, deaf and dumb people have the sign languages. So what actually it means is that where the coding is occurring in a different manner. The coding is happening through the braille what you can say, like braille kind of languages, which are kind of, if you touch it, then only you will come to know what does it stands for. So in a different sensory input, it is coming to our mind. What Fabio was talking in terms of normal cases of where we can make a verbal and visual communication.
Thank you, ma'am, for that. We have one more question here. You briefly mentioned about how teachers may use dual coding in classroom. Now, students find it stressful to learn 6 subjects for exams. So, how can each teacher, irrespective of the subject, plan the lessons so that cognitive load is reduced and application of learning is carried out?
So that is very true that a child is exposed to different subjects during the day. And the mind has to shift from one type of thinking to another type of thinking. When the teacher is taking an English class, the mind is working in one fashion. Now, the moment the bell rings, the mind has to shift immediately to the next concepts which are more and more in terms of abstract in nature, logical in nature. So mind has to shift to different what you can say, like systems, one system to next system, next system, next system. It has to shift itself. But this ability to cope up with all these things are there with the students, isn't it? So it's not like that they are not able to remember anything or recall anything. They are able to do that. It is little bit stressful for the students to shift from one system of what you can say concepts or knowledge and to another system of concepts and knowledge. We can help them by giving them some breaks, small breaks between one class as the other, to make the mind more prepared to listen to the new topics and new concepts which have been introduced. Don't
Thank you, ma'am.
underestimate the capacity of the mind. This is what I will say.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am, for that. There's one more question from Tirumurugan. Is is creativity nurtured through the associate function of dual coding, as each child may have associative things associated with a word different from each other?
Huh. So again, this is a kind of see, uh, one thing may be called in different names. As I told you, a flower is there. It is called by different names by different persons, isn't it? They use it in their own language. I will call it as poo. Somebody will call it as pushpam. Somebody else will call it as or oh, whatever may be the word. So one image and different words are there. Similarly, one word and different meanings are also there. So when I'm using the word code, this word code, though I talk in terms of encoding and decoding of messages which are occurring, some people will assume code as something which is related to artificial intelligence or AI, or people who make this computer programming using codes. So they will associate with that. So again, the connection should be made. What does the person mean when he is using this word? That connections the child has to make. That is where our teacher's role is there. That are they understood the right thing that we are saying, or they have misunderstood with something else? That we have to take care of it.
Thank you, ma'am, for that. We have another question from Dr. Shankar. Ma'am, can you tell us about why should we use dual coding theory since we have other theories such as multimedia and multimodal learning theories?
See, if you look at, as I told you, the cognitive learning theories, or the set of cognitive learning theories, like behaviorist theories, all of you must be familiar with Thorndike, or you might be familiar with Skinner, or you might be uh, familiar with Pavlov. These are people who are associated with behaviorist learning theories. When it comes to cognitive theories, there are few names which are very popular. For example, Atkinson Shiffrin, who gave information processing theory, people are familiar with it. They are also familiar with Piaget's theory of cognitive development. So in that way, Fabio's theory is little bit not that familiar with everybody, but it is also a very important part of understanding how learning occurs. Nobody knows actually what happens when somebody is learning. That is a fact. Okay, what is happening in the mind, nobody knows. What we can tell is that we can make theory out of it. So when this are happening, our products are coming out well. So we make a kind of connection and say, yeah, when I'm presenting them in a visual form, the child is able to remember John, Mary, and her children. They are able to remember them. So this is a kind of hypothesizing that this is what might have occurred in the mind when the children are learning, right? So that way, if you want, if you can use that in a proper fashion, definitely it will help the students much than thinking in terms of multimedia. Multimedia basically means audio visuals as well as the animations which are presented there, right? So somewhere or the other, they are also visual in nature. All the animations which are available, they are also visual in nature. All the cartoons or the figures which are moving, all these are visual in nature. So we also have to not only look at the visual as such, we have to think how much of it is imbibed as a language also, right? Without that, the visual remains empty. Visual and the language verbal should be always going together. Even in WhatsApp messages, you will find about that people when they are writing the messages, you will find they alternate between images and a word. So when they're saying that I am going to so and so place, they will say some words, and then again an image will crop up in between, and then again words. So we are able to make sense of both the words as well as the images, right? So this is a capacity which is unique to human beings. We can shift from one system to the other system, right? Only thing is that it should make meaning to the others, and you should be able to comprehend the correct understanding from the sentences which have been created in WhatsApp, the messages that are coming up. Even many people write in short forms. Thanks for THH. They'll write like that. But even then, people make sense of it. It is because that associative connections have been made, they are able to do that.
Thank you, ma'am, for that. We have another question from Hemalata. What are the potential challenges of implementing dual coding in a classroom setting, and how can they overcome?
See, one thing is that Hemlata, I know she is my student. Hi, Hemlata. Uh, so, Hemlata, when you are telling about how do we implement it, uh, what I would say is already we are doing many things in the classroom, which unknowingly is following the dual coding theory. Okay, so we use the blackboard, we use the figures or charts or images, we bring things in the class and show it to the students. There also we are showing the images and asking the students to uh, recall the information which is available in that image. So when I am showing an image, what we have to take care of is that are they able to connect with the right kind of language part of that image or not. Okay, so suppose I'm showing uh, something which is related to markets and something which is related to godowns, warehouses. So both the figures will be different. Now, marketplace has certain categories, characteristics, and a godown has certain characteristics. When I'm showing the image, the entire image is understood by the student here. So that way, most of us are using it already in the classrooms. It is not something new, but only thing we have to make sure that it is fitting into their long-term memory. So that is more important.
Thank you, ma'am, for that. We have another question here. In board examinations, the focus is more on rote learning, while in entrance exam, it is more about understanding and application of knowledge. How can dual coding help in this regard?
Okay, so in board exams, see, what is generally asked is uh, they collect all the questions which are available in the chapters or in the textbooks, and they juggle all of them, mix them all of them, and randomly ask a few questions from the textbook. So when there is a fixed question and a fixed answer, it is easy to make a rote learning and answer it. Suppose I change the question, I frame my question in a different way. Will the child be able to answer it? So we can test this, means test it with the students who are there with us, find out whether if I'm putting the question in a different way, are they able to answer it? It means that they are not rote learn something, isn't it? So that way, board exams may expect things to be same as in the textbook. They may not want any variations. It is because they are catering to a huge population. The entire population is there under them, and they have to cater to the different students of different parts of the state or the country. But whereas in classroom, it is not that way. The classroom can help in a personal way with our own set of students. We can help them more than asking them to follow the same system. You also learn in the rote way only, not in this way. So that change as a teacher in the individual class can make, isn't it? So that's what we want to happen.
Thank you, ma'am, for that. We have another question here. Howard Gardner talks about multiple intelligences, which means children are different in the way they absorb information. Does dual coding help people with different intelligences, such as mathematical, auditory, and kinesthetic?
Okay, so actually, Howard Gardner presented his theory in which he talks about 8 different types of intelligence. So he talks about verbal intelligence. He talks about mathematical logical intelligence. He talks about kinesthetic intelligence. He talks about musical intelligence, naturalistic intelligence. He talks about interpersonal and intrapersonal intelligence. So like this, there are 8 different categories under Howard Gardner. So basically, it doesn't mean that we can, uh, compartmentalize our own intelligence into different categories. It's not like that. Only what uh, it means is that at at one point of time, the proportion of the verbal intelligence is more than the logical intelligence and the interpersonal intelligence or the intrapersonal intelligence or the kinesthetic intelligence. It doesn't mean that we don't have spatial intelligence or we don't have interpersonal intelligence. The proportion of it may be less. So nobody can function without all of them. Okay, nobody can function without verbal intelligence, without logical mathematical intelligence, without spatial intelligence, without kinesthetic intelligence. We cannot function. But the way when we promote one type of intelligence, that becomes the what we can say major type of intelligence in us. So a person who is mathematically inclined, he tries to develop his mathematical ability more and more. So his logical mathematical intelligence increases than his verbal and spatial intelligence. So it's a matter of actually uh, individual choice, what they want to or what they are more interested in and what they are more wanting to do. They tend to gather that intelligence more than the other one. It means only that.
Thank you, ma'am, for that. We have another question from Manish and Kavita. Can we connect dual coding with AI?
So yeah, so as we talked about, AI is a very hot topic now. AI is basically artificial intelligence. It means that intelligence is not artificial, uh, but AI is making or imitating the real intelligence of the person. So this is again my own kind of understanding about it. Uh, just like we make synthetic rubber, looking at the real rubber. Okay, rubber tree, you get rubber from rubber tree. That is a real rubber. But there are people who make synthetic rubber from the original rubber, right? So similarly, there are other things, fibers. Fibers are there and there are synthetic fibers. What the synthetic fiber is doing is imitating the functions and characteristics of the natural fiber. So here, artificial intelligence actually means it is imitating the actual human capacity or the actual human intelligence, which is already present in all of us. It is not that anybody is not having intelligence. So it is, which is present in it, it is trying to recreate that intelligence which is already existing in human beings. And that also, it will need a little more, what we can say, like fine tuning in order to match the human intelligence. That's what I feel. Fine tuning in the sense that it can recall or remember things from a huge lot. Okay, it can remember a million things. Okay, it can recall a million things. We are not able to do that. In capacity wise, it is imitating the mind in a, what you can say, enlarged manner. But human intelligence is not just, remembering the facts or synthesizing the facts or putting things together and sending it out. Somewhere or the other, human intelligence has to decide what is being given by AI. Should I accept it or not? Right. So I feel artificial intelligence has to evolve more in order to match the human intelligence. In one way, they may be, like it's wonderful that it is able to remember so many things, it is able to recall so many things, is able to synthesize so many things, but it can somewhere or the other, human beings can overcome that also. Like some human being has created that artificial intelligence. It did come all of a sudden by itself. So it is a name given to actually manipulating the data and synthesizing the data, which is very huge in number. That is what artificial intelligence does.
Thank you, ma'am, for that. We have another question from Tirumurugan. You mentioned some research about effectiveness of dual coding in learning. Do you think it is not getting sufficient emphasis in our pedagogy?
That's what I had already told. We may be using that thing, but we may not have recognized that it belongs to this set of category of dual coding. As I told you, dual coding itself means two, and when it is two, the two of them are working in two different channels. So what we have to do is this channels has to be synthesized and it has to be connected in between. For example, I'll say when we talk in terms of communication cycle, most of us might have heard about communication cycle, right? So we have this encoder here, decoder here, and the message here. So we use the word encoding and we also use the word decoding. What does these two words suggest actually? We are coding it. We are actually encrypting it in one form or the other. So when I'm encrypting in a language, I use a word. When I encrypt it in a form of image, okay, just I will put a circle and 2 years and it becomes a cat for me. Okay, so here I'm encoding in the form of a visual. I put a circle, I put two dots and years, it automatically becomes a cat for me. So I am encoding in this fashion. When I'm using certain features in encoding, the other person has to look at it in the same way. So when I'm saying something in a language, he has to interpret it in language. When I'm using an image, the other person has to interpret it as a image, the same image that I am having in my mind. Okay, so that way coding, it's a what we can say that it itself has two or three more meanings also. It is not just one word, uh, or it is having only one meaning. You might have also heard about Morse code, where people use certain sound system to create meaning. Morse codes are used in telegraphs, where they used to send messages using Morse codes. That is a person who created that Morse code. So codes basically means we are uh, encrypting certain meaning in a particular fashion. That is what it means.
Thank you, ma'am, for that. We have another question from Dr. Shankar. Even without the help of a teacher, students are able to get knowledge using self-paced learning methods, AI, etc. So while will dual coding lose its importance in this context?
Yeah, as long as like there are children who are very deeply interested or self-motivated to learn, it is very easy to uh, learn. So if you ask me, the number of or the percentage of such children will be very less, I think, who are self-motivated and do things by themselves. Most of the children are a kind of normal in the sense that they need the guidance of the teachers, right? So we have to think of catering to those type of students who need the help of teachers, and as teachers, how far can we help them? So in that way, when you're looking at it, dual coding will help us a lot.
Thank you, ma'am, for that. So you mean dual coding won't work for self-motivated students, is it?
It's not like that. It will not work for anybody. It will work for anybody who's having the senses. Okay, eyes, ears, nose, hair. So it will work for everybody who's having that. Only thing, suppose, see, as I told you, if I show you a Japanese script right now I use two lines and one marking and one shadow, and I show this writing to you. Will you be able to know whether it is an actual script or not a script? Because we have never come across Japanese language or Chinese language. It all looks like lines and dashes and dots, isn't it? So here it makes complete sense to a Japanese person. It will make complete sense to a Chinese person, but it will not make sense to us because we are not able to connect with the concept or the object which that word is standing for, right? So that way, you should not say that like dual coding cannot be used here or can be used here. We cannot say that. This images and the languages, the connections जो बनना है, I'm talking about that. Right from childhood, we are learning A for apple, B for ball. So right from childhood, the things are just stuck in our mind. A means apple, and apple immediately you'll remember that apple figure. So we have been, like growing up with that way only. That images and words and languages are going together, so we are able to make connections with the outside world. Something is existing outside where I can bring it in and say this is something which is called as this way. Let us make the connections between them. This one looks like a cave. Okay, this is a cave. So that way I make the connections for the students and help them to understand the outside